So, sexual and violent offenders will serve at least 2/3 of jail terms rather than half as part of changes to the criminal justice system. This is in England and Wales. This is an overhaul of sentencing laws being formally announced by the Justice Secretary Robert Buckland. As we speak, he's in the House of Commons announcing these changes. He says the changes to sentences would ensure the most serious violent and sexual offenders get the prison time they deserve. He claims this will mark an end to complex and confusing laws. So should offenders serve the full length of their sentence? 0344 499 1000. Joining us now, Chris Daw QC, criminal barrister and author of Justice on Trial. I nearly called you an MP then, Chris. Perish the thought.
That's an insult, Ian. Don't go down there.
It's not a good start, is it? I mean, this could be a rocky conversation already, but nonetheless.
It's going to be.
Let's talk us through this. We've been in this territory before. Look, if you're given 10 years because you've committed a grisly violent offence, why should you not serve the full 10 years?
You do serve the full sentence. Everyone serves the full sentence. It's a myth. The sentence that you get from a court, from a judge, is made up of two parts. One part is the custodial element, which is spent in prison, and the other part is spent in the community under licence, under strict supervision, to ensure that you are ideally going about a lawful life and not getting involved in dangerous or criminal situations. So everybody serves their full sentence already. It's bonkers.
No, you come out halfway through.
No, you don't. You don't, because that's a myth. The sentence is made up of two different bits. It is a myth.
10 years in jail is not 5 years in jail. Surely it's 10.
Yeah,
it should be 10.
But a 10-year sentence is made up of 5 years in custody and 5 years on supervision on licence. It's two different parts of the sentence. So you serve both parts of the sentence and it lasts for 10 years.
That's not explicit in a courtroom, though, is it? I mean, I've been in enough of them.
Is,
not as many of you. I've never heard a judge say you're going to serve half of that inside and half outside.
That's because you've never been in a court listening to a sentence hearing. That's what judges say in every single sentence hearing. Okay, well, Ian, if you had, and I accept that you had, you weren't listening, because judges tell every single defendant that they sentence, you will serve half of the sentence in custody and the other half on licence. They say that to everyone who's ever sentenced.
So every
single day.
Now, is that every single prisoner will only serve half?
No. Already there is power in the case of the most serious sexual, violent and terrorist offences for a judge to impose what's called an extended sentence, where there is a 2/3 period spent in custody and where the licence period is extended beyond the end of the normal sentence. So the judge already has the power in those most serious and violent cases to force people to serve longer in custody.
Okay.
What the government are now doing is making it automatic, whether it's justified, reasonable or not.
So
and that just leads to more prison overcrowding, more crime in the long run,
and more justice, Chris Daw. That's
justice.
More justice.
Well, it's not justice, it's more victims.
Of course it is, because people are spending longer in jail. Because this business of 50, and I appreciate I may have been falling asleep when the judge was handing out sentences when I've covered various aspects of court reporting, but nonetheless, the point is, 10 years in jail, you're going to sentence you to 10 years. It's not a jail sentence for 10 years. And that's what people want, isn't it?
Well, if they do, then that means they don't want any supervision after release, which is insane.
No, you can have supervision after the 10 years.
But then they're not serving the full sentence still. If they have 10 years in custody and another period on licence after release, you're just making sentences
Headline
longer.
after headline, day after day, Chris, says somebody has been sentenced to 10 years in jail. And Charlie Elphick yesterday was sentenced to 2 years in jail. They are the headlines. He will not do 2 years in jail.
No, he wasn't sentenced to 2 years in jail. He was sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 2 years, half of which is served in prison and half of which is served in the community.
So it's not imprisonment, is it? It's a year imprisonment and half at home.
But during the entire period, the person can be recalled to prison if they breach their licence period in the second half or if they commit another offence, and frequently are, so that they are at risk of spending the whole 2 years in prison. They can lose part of the second half.
That's not a sentence, is it? Come on. If you can sit at home,
It is
watch
a sentence,
EastEnders,
because
clip your
otherwise-
toenails, order a curry, go out for a drink with your mates, as long as you don't have a
No.
scrap, then that's fine. You haven't served your full
That's
sentence.
not how it works, Ian. It's not how it works. That completely mischaracterises how it works. I agree with you on one point, which is that the second half of the sentence spent in the community on licence is often a complete waste of time because there is no effective probation supervision, because the person is released halfway with no accommodation, no job, no family, nothing to do, usually with a drug habit that they picked up in prison. And the longer they're there, the more likely they're a drug addict when they come out. So, yes, we're doing all sorts of terrible things in that prison period. And as you know, in the book, I argue that prison as we know it should be abolished, because it's so ineffective and so damaging, and it causes more victims of crime.
You keep saying that, but that's because we haven't. I mean, here it is again. Right, here's the big headlines. Ex-Conservative MP Charlie Elphicke has been jailed for 2 years for sexual assault.
That's the headline. It's not what the judge said.
So he hasn't been jailed for 2 years. He's got a sentence for 2 years. Only 50% of that is in jail. That's right. The other 50% is sitting at home in the watching the telly.
Just as hopeless at reporting on the true facts of what the judge did in court as you know. And I'm not being disrespectful, but you really can't have been listening.
I've never read. I have to say, and I bow to your legal knowledge, obviously, Chris, but I've never read a headline that said something like Charlie Elphicke has been jailed for 1 year, brackets, and another year to be served outside of prison. Because
the reporting of what happens in criminal courts is abysmal. It's inaccurate. It's completely wrong. And I encourage your listeners, it doesn't matter about what journalists or even what I say, your listeners should go to court and watch a Crown Court trial, listen to the sentence, or at least go along for half a day and see how it really works.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There is a public gallery there, but of course it doesn't alter the fact
it's usually empty.
Indeed, it doesn't alter the fact that Charlie Elphicke should be in jail for 2 years.
Why should he be in jail for 2 years? For what end?
Well, what's the end? What's the business of 1 year not in jail? That's not a sentence.
The business is that is the bit that might actually stop in the future reoffending.
Why?
Because the bit in jail makes reoffending more likely. So the only bit that actually works to reduce victims of crime is the second bit.
So where's the punishment in not being in jail when you've been given a jail sentence? This is Alice in Wonderland.
Go to jail for a whole
this is
year.
Bonkers, Chris, isn't it? You go to jail for 1 year, but the other year is spent on your sofa.
It's not spent on your sofa.
I might as well go and nick a flat screen out of Curry's for that. Man alive.
What, for a year in prison?
A year on the sofa.
You do a year for a telly?
Well, maybe I'll take a couple. You take my point. I mean, this is...
It'd have to be a big bloody telly, Ian.
There's a lot out there at the moment. Have you not seen the new 4K range? Amazing. Nonetheless,
they're actually not that pricey.
It does, true enough. It does stand to reason, though, that lots of people understandably feel that we have an inadequate justice system, an adequate penal system, when you hear headlines like such and such has gone to jail for 10 years and they've only served 5. And you've, frankly, Chris, you and your other sort of left-wing legal colleagues have cooked up this idea.
Where did you get that from?
Cooked up. Well, okay. I'm making a leap of judgment
here.
I
want to be tough on crime, Ian. I want crime to go down.
But you want people to serve less time in jail. If you have a proper prison system...
Because the countries where people serve less time in jail have got less crime than us.
This isn't always true. You know that.
Hundreds of years in jail, like America, have the highest crime on earth.
But that's not because of that.
People up for hundreds of years doesn't work.
But you're suggesting that the correlation is only based on prison sentences versus what else happens.
Not the only
and there's lots of
it's
other
not the only
factors.
factor.
Come on.
But there is a direct link between countries which have high rates of imprisonment and high rates of crime. That's a fact. And countries which are more creative, more pragmatic, more practical, and actually address the causes of crime have lower rates of crime.
Why can't you address those causes while in jail?
Oh, it was much easier speaking to Piers Morgan on GMB this morning. You know, he agreed with me on all this, Ian.
Of course he did.
I feel
you're all in it together.
Well, you're right. He has put a quote on the front of my book, to be fair. So he didn't have a lot of choice. He was kind of tied in.
I will. The fact that you got an easier ride there, I will take that as a compliment. But nonetheless, you can understand, Chris, that when somebody has been the victim of crime, particularly when it's violent crime, sexual crime, and they see somebody serving 2 or 3 years in jail, whatever the mechanism behind that, served inside, serve outside, it all seems painfully inadequate.
Well, it seems so for 2 reasons. One, because they have seen the headlines which you've described, which are false. So they have read headlines which misrepresent what's actually happened in court. And so that's one reason why people are disappointed. The other is it's actually a myth. The sentences have gone up and up and up. They've never been higher. That's an absolute cast iron fact. The prison population has never been higher. So we're locking more and more people up. And this bill, this white paper rather, is just going to lead to more people being locked up for longer. When we move towards the American system and we have more deaths on our streets.
But are you confident that more people in jail, I know you're probably going to cite certain states in America, is going to beget more offences?
It's an absolute fact. I spent a long time researching my book and a long time writing it. And I've traveled all over the world, and I spoke to politicians, judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers. I went into prisons in Alabama and all over the place. And the evidence is crystal clear. If you follow the American model and you impose life without parole for young people, which is another part of this white paper, you end up with a society that has some of the highest rates of violence and drug crime and murder in the world.
If you thought your friend, to be typical about this, from your gang, your crew, had gone to jail for life, surely that would be a rocket up your trouser leg of fear, thinking, I don't want to go in there for the rest of my life.
But it's not, and I'll tell you why. So when I was in the States, I spoke to young people who had got life without parole. I spoke to judges, and I spoke to the executioner for the state of Alabama, who had executed 22 people in his career as the governor of the Alabama State Penitentiary. And do you know what that governor said to me? He said, the young men in my institution who are serving life without parole from the age of 18 and 19 onwards, it's a badge of honor on the streets. They're considered to be heroes in the gang community because they're doing life without parole for their gang. So that's the madness of it, Ian. It doesn't work the way you're suggesting. It wouldn't work that way here. Life without parole and very long sentences for drugs and gang crime, they become a badge of honor. They become something to, be proud of.
Well, I mean, that's kind of, listen, that's working on the basis that we would follow that kind of Alabama same mentality. Who knows? Listen, Chris, thank you. It's always a pleasure to lock horns with Chris Daw QC, criminal barrister, author of Justice on Trial. He might have got a free ride from Morgan this morning on GMB, but I'm going to throw this over to you. What ride would you like to throw in his direction? 0344 499 1000. The question we threw out, should prisoners serve the full length of their sentence? His contention is that gives or makes more crime. Look, if you are a psychologist or a psychiatrist that can tell me how that follows, then I'm all ears. At this end, I'm slightly struggling to make those connections. And if you've been on the receiving end, you're perhaps in a perfect position to respond as to what you think about sentencing in this country.